Good afternoon, Paul. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me today on Culture Corner. I know we've known each other for a while now, so it's great to get you on the podcast.
Always a pleasure, Adrian. Thank you.
No problem at all. Just for anybody that's listening that's not in the industry and doesn't know who you are, if you could give a quick overview of who Paul is and your background and experience, and then we'll go from there.
There's someone who doesn't know who I am. I mean, who are they?
Scandalous.
Yeah, I sometimes think I'm too vocal. But in any case, yes, I'm Paul Agapow. Once upon a time, I was a lab coat wearing immunologist, but like most of the world, I got drawn into the world of computers and data and AI actually many years before it became fashionable, this current wave. And after a long stint at the university, I came across into pharma there. I worked at AstraZeneca, which I think is where we first met then.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right, yeah.
Then GSK and currently in biotech there and advising a number of companies on how we can really kind of make an impact on their work using the right sort of data and AI approaches.
Fantastic. Thanks, Paul. Obviously, we're going to talk all things culture and leadership. So you mentioned a good number of fairly sizable organisations that you've worked at previously. What do you think what is a great culture? What makes a great culture for you?
Oh, wow. Okay, that is a very good question. And I think we've all got a very intuitive feel for it. You know when you're in a good culture and when you're not. I think let's say that, a bad culture is one where people are afraid and where people are covering their own asses and things like that. But let's try to be, I don't think a good culture is the opposite, because if you're working in a small industry and things like that, there are going to be uncertainties.
Yeah.
But, where you feel that your workers and your bosses, you have confidence in them and they have confidence in you, that, things will be executed and taken care of as well as they can be.
Yeah. Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah. It's not a great culture is not all roses and happy clapping, is it?
No, it's not. And I mean, it's ridiculous to expect it would be. And if you had a business like that, I suspect it wouldn't be a good business, that, you're not taking any chances. You're not doing anything difficult. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we talked about it in one of our discussions recently. I think one of the cornerstones of a good culture is trust. You trust from your from your colleagues and your peers and your team. How do you, thinking about the size of businesses you've worked with previously, do you have a go-to of when you first start, when you move roles? How do you go about building trust with your teams?
Those initial days are so critical. And sometimes I feel there's this great pressure for you to rush in and do something or be seen to be doing something in there. But I think you need to take your time, talk to absolutely everyone around in there, understand what's going on, understand what the dynamics are, and not just speak to the important people and the people who are above you, but also people who are on your level and people who are, below you or under you in the org chart, and, even adjacent functions. So you're getting a more holistic idea of what's going on in there. And sometimes you can find, this honesty. People comes out there saying, we've got a bad relationship, this or this isn't working out well. And we've got a lot of fears about this particular project, things that you wouldn't have been told if you just barreled in immediately and started trying to do things.
Yeah. Do you think mainly it's about listening? I like what you mentioned now, speaking to adjacent functions. Do you think that's key and it allows you to get more depth and maybe more honesty?
I think you do, because they don't have as much skin in the game as with you as your immediate colleagues do, or who, maybe we might say agenda, if that doesn't sound too loaded a term there. And they might also have a good external view on your group. They're saying, that team, the people you work with, from the outside, the rest of the company, we think, and they're, you might have some problems, some issues handed to you on a plate.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I did a podcast not so long ago with somebody who mentioned the first 90 days. So the first 90 days in a new role is quite crucial. Do you think there's a pressure to try and get quick wins if you can, to show that you're delivering something in those first periods of time, or is it more about just taking a step back and the understanding?
I think ideally, realistically, you would probably need up to 90 days in there to actually kind of understand what's going on, understand what the pressures are, what the real mission of the business are, the real problems in there. Unfortunately, I think a lot of businesses and a lot of workplaces just don't have the patience for that, particularly recently. It says,
Yeah.
they want to see things immediately. And this, it's unrealistic. You'll be making bad moves, you'll be making the wrong moves there, and it will be to the detriment in the business in the long term. So, you know, some patience there, some, I guess, a realistic view of what it actually takes to sort of make good decisions and understand the business well would work a lot better.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. And what's the I was going to ask you, you've worked in, I don't think anyone's got the answer to this, so it would be interesting, but you've worked in a lot of organizations that have got a global footprint, and you've managed teams globally. How do you ensure that collaboration, that cohesion within your teams? Is there a
Yeah, I don't think there's a silver bullet. The answer is with great difficulty. I actually think that this is something that a lot of businesses they've lost sight of, in a sense. We had the great transition to remote working and distance working during the pandemic, and this idea that your team can actually be a team, that there is a cohesion and glue amongst it, is something that very few organizations have come to grips with.
Hmm.
They've, gestured sort of weekly at, well, you should talk more often, you should communicate more often. But it's someone once phrased it very well to me. They said, you want to be having meetings with people, just agenda-free meetings, serendipitous meetings. And every time you put a meeting in someone's calendar, it feels very purpose-driven. How can we,
Yeah.
make those sort of slightly weaker links in there? So I don't like a single day to go by in which people aren't talking to other members of their team, that there isn't like some sort of communication there. So maybe you have to, enforce, a frivolity hour, a sort of a casual hour or something like that, which
Okay.
feels difficult, but, just ensure that no one is being left out there and that they are aware that they're there and that you're communicating proactively with them to keep them as members of the team. But it is very difficult.
Yeah, yeah, it's not easy, is it? You're right. I never thought about that, but you're right. If somebody does drop a meeting into your calendar, it does seem forced, doesn't it? I've got to attend what it's about.
Yeah. What's it
Yeah,
about? What are we here to talk about? Well,
yeah,
maybe it's nothing. And I would often joke that at AstraZeneca, I solved problems by hanging around the coffee machine, because eventually someone would come by the coffee machine and you could ask them a question, or you could say, hey, what do you think about this? And although, we love working from home, there's nothing quite like being in physical contact with people where you can casually ask them, hey, what do you think about this?
yeah, yeah. That's true. And there is no substitute for that currently, is there?
Oh,
With your teams, with your global teams, did you ensure that they got together? Oh, it's so difficult. But did you ensure that there was our ability to get together as a teams in a I suppose a mutual spot, halfway point, or do you spend a lot of time traveling?
ISIS, due to kind of nature of the timing of the pandemic and everything like that, there were very few face-to-face meetings. And I think there's been a bit of a sea shift with that as well, where it felt like in the past, say 2020 and previous, companies would actually put a lot of effort on, let's at least once a year get everyone together in one place in there.
Yeah.
And that seems to have fallen off as well. We'll just substitute for it with remote. I did go to some effort to meet up with people, even if not traveling to see them, running into them in meetings and things like that. But I think a lot more pressing the flesh would do us a lot of good.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that, Paul. Just thinking about your career, you mentioned in your intro there, you mentioned something. You said, you started off in laboratories, you were very, very hands-on. And obviously you ended up in a leadership role. So was there a defining moment? Was there a pivotal time how did you become thinking, oh, actually, I'm going to go from that individual contributor to I'm going to move into leadership, and that's where my future is.
Yeah, I don't know there was a single moment, but certainly there was a series of dawning realizations in there. There's, I guess, at times you'll have people working for you and they are much better at the technical demands, kind of the facts and figures, say the job there, than you are. Okay. And that's a humbling moment in there. It is. Am I becoming obsolete in here?
Yeah.
But there's you realize that I think people will often say things like, I don't use anything in my degree anymore that I learned in my degree. And I think it's kind of to the next step of that, where you realize that, in fact, those things, those formal qualifications, so forth, are almost the least important thing that you know. It's your grasp of the business vision. It's your grasp of the wider areas, the context, the things in there, your ability to execute projects, the right sort of projects that will help your business go forward. And you realize when you come to that point, you realize I've become a different sort of person without even thinking about it.
Yeah.
But that is what I'm good at now. So it's humbling, and at the same point, it's a relief as well too, that you have this value there that you didn't know, that you weren't seeing.
Yeah. It's almost like it creeps upon you as you're building your skill base up. You become more of a leader than your valuable technical skills.
It does. And I think there are many technical people who, quite rightly, they just don't feel an attraction to that. They'll stay back and they want to stay very focused on that technical area. But if you look beyond your area, you ask questions about what we're doing and why we're doing, things like that, you will almost naturally drift in that direction.
Yeah. And it's good to see, you will see now, I'm sure you have, it's good to see now that there's opportunities for those people that want to remain as individual contributors in it, because it used to be, giving away my age a bit, but usually when I was coming through, the only way to climb up the pay scale, if you like, never mind the career ladder, was to follow a team leader and manager, director role. And now you don't necessarily do that to just to get the rewards the financial rewards that you deserve.
That's absolutely correct, Adrian. It used to be very straitjacketed. And so as a consequence, we ended up with, people hitting their heads against the ceiling there, or feeling they had to become management team leaders and having no talent for it and making a hash of it. So, it's one of the best scientist analysts I know is someone who made it into management and then decided to step back, because he knows what he wants and he knows what he's good at and he wants to do. And I just have so much admiration for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just clear vision of exactly where you want to be and what your strengths are.
Yes.
You've been a leader for quite a while now. How has your I was going to say, what sort of leader are you, and how has it evolved over the years? Do you think your leadership style?
Okay, so strangely enough, I was asked this question recently, and I would describe my leadership style currently as it's 80% consultative and 20% dictator.
Right.
Uh, that and this is in the broadest sense, in that you have all these experts and these smart people working for you, and they know what's happening on the ground, and so you should consult with them and get their ideas and everything like that. But you know you do not want to fall into that trap of we're going to do everything by committee in there, particularly
Right.
when sometimes technical people will come to these intractable arguments about which framework we're going to use and what's the architecture of the database. And, you know, you have to cut that Gordian knot by saying we're going in this direction. This is what we're doing.
Yeah.
I was certainly earlier in my career, I would have said that I was, I guess, a more collaborative, sort of participatory type leader in there. But as I've said, begin to realize, what can I contribute here? Actually, the most valuable thing I can contribute is my leadership and management in there.
Yeah.
And I also did some business studies, and people have actually studied the effect of different types of leadership.
Yeah.
And what you find, strangely enough, is that very cooperative, I'm just a member of the team leadership is actually very inefficient. People are happy, but you don't get much done.
Yeah.
But, having said all of that, I think you have to adapt to circumstances in there. Have one of the things of maturing as a leader is enlarging your bag of tricks, if you
Yeah.
are, that you can kind of adapt to different things depending upon the circumstance.
Okay. So would you, in your style at the moment, would you open it to the floor, have a collaborative approach, but know that you need to make the decision as to, right, we are going to go in a direction rather than just go round and round?
I think, as I said, I think that depends upon circumstances in
Yeah.
there. If you have a real sort of white paper, sort of green field type situation
Yeah.
where it's not sure what the strategy should be, then that's something that absolutely the team needs to be brought in on. Or, if the boundaries, the outer details of the plan are clear, but the actual execution is not, well, the team should absolutely be in there. But, you know, there are times when the mission is clear and what has to be done is to be clear. And then it's a question of just telling people, and
Yeah.
ensuring that they understand and that they're aligned.
Yeah. Yeah. How do we drive this forward? So I imagine sort of clear communications, is clear vision, painting that vision, and then communication is clear in order to achieve that then.
Yeah, it is absolutely. And it's surprising how poorly that's done in many
Yeah.
organizations and workplaces. I know you're going to ask me a question about the university later, but you know, I remain stunned at how many large research groups in the university are just very chaotic enterprises where people get
Uh,
together in rooms, they speak ideas or wishes to the rafters, to the air, and then people leave the room and no one really knows what they're supposed to do. And it really helps to sort of say just the simple things. Why are we here? What do we want to achieve? What are we going to do? Who's going to take care of this? And what are the timelines for that?
yeah.
Just basics.
Yeah. Yeah. Rather than going round and round the houses and not achieving anything. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. You're right. You held back well there, Paul, because I am going to ask you about you.
Um,
Yeah. I'm going to, obviously, you know what's coming, but you've worked across a number of different sectors: the life science, the education, the startup sector. And I was going to say, which possesses you the biggest challenge, and why was that?
well, that's going to be education in the
Yeah,
university.
yeah,
Absolutely no question asked. Okay. And it'd be very easy to say there's so many difficult personalities, individuals there, but that's not the answer. The answer is that the academia, there is the kingdom of the rugged individualist. Everyone in a sense is a sole trader who is, looking
Yeah.
up themselves, has to look out for themselves. That's there. And you've got this high degree of precarity and flux and staff and so forth. So it is like trying to manage or wheel together a group of people who are, they're only by convenience gathered together there. So it's very difficult, and it requires a lot of diplomacy, and you have to be very flexible as people will leave projects or just drop them and move on to something else. Things like that.
Right.
Yeah. Now, smaller companies, I
Yeah.
think, would be my next one. And, I don't consider them too difficult there, because you can get a very personal touch with
Yeah.
people and sort of understand what they're doing. You have a lot of contact. But, because of the slight precarity in the companies, they're always kind of focused on money. There's very small margins in these things. And, also, because these companies are usually in the process of scaling, they have to change the way that they work. And very often they're not ready to change the way that they work. Easiest job in the world, a big organization. Absolutely.
Right.
Because, people
Okay.
are secure. They've got a very focused job in there. This is your task in there. And you'll usually have longer tenures for people in those jobs additionally. And, a group of people around them who've been there before them and will be there after them. So it's just, I'm not going to say it makes managing a culture easy, but everything has been set up in the best way for you.
Yeah, there's already the infrastructure that's already been established. Do you think have you seen in the larger organizations people with a it's probably changing now over the last couple of years, but I was going to say a sense of safety in the larger organizations, that
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I've been struck by some of those larger organizations that their employees are almost bimodal. You've got those people who've been there for like 2 or 3 years, and those people who've been there for 20.
yeah,
And now that's an extraordinary period of time to be in some of these organizations there. I feel that is probably changing at these moments with kind of turmoil in the world. But, those people have just a wealth of knowledge in there. Even people who've been there like 7, 8 years can have this wealth of knowledge. And, you should speak to them and mine them for, who do I talk to about this? How does this work? What's the history of this in there? Because, in a large organization, navigation is your chief problem.
that's how do you? I was going to say a couple of things with the university. Is it a bit like hearts and you've got to be on a hearts and minds type path to get things done, drive things forward?
Well, hearts and minds, I don't know. I think you have to convince people it's in their interest to help you, or that what you're doing is going to go somewhere. Uh,
Right. Okay.
but because, everyone there is worried that, they're almost certainly they're on a short-term grant, so they have to worry where that next grant's going to come from. And, they want to put in as good an impression for this job so that the next one is easier to set up. So there is a bit of quid pro quo,
Yeah.
scratch your back, scratch mine. At
Yeah.
the same time, watching out for freeloaders and people who don't reciprocate in
Right.
there. In the big business, I think people better understand what their job is, and they're more likely to accept uncritically what they're supposed to do. You are
Yeah.
looking for this particular thing. That's my job. I will help you. And it makes things simpler.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. How would you So you mentioned the bigger organizations. How would you overcome the challenge that you mentioned in those? How would you navigate that?
In navigation, I wish I had a good solution. I only ever, you just have to talk to everyone and use contacts of contacts, and sometimes just drop a meeting in someone's diary,
Right.
things like that. I think, I've forgotten which company it was, but they used to have these coffee dates where they'd match you with a random other member of staff once a month, and you would get to find out what
Ah.
they were doing, and sometimes discover entire departments you had no idea that they were. And it's particularly with some of these large companies, they've got a very long and storied history. So the company structure itself, the way it works, is almost a palimpsest.
Yeah.
It's the result of the accretion of all the previous changes and transformations that have taken part. So it helps sometimes to, you might not have an obvious connection to someone, but if you can jump those gaps and you can get into a new section and you can say, oh, okay, this is why these here and this is why you do these things this way. It's always very useful, of course, to have a boss who understands that as well and
Yeah.
will facilitate and set up connections for you.
Yeah. So network, if you're in a larger organization, the power of the internal network really is key.
I think almost it's more valuable than your actual skills in there, who you know inside the company.
Right. Okay. Okay. And obviously, just going back to the smaller one, I suppose the scale ups, the startups, is the biggest issue with those as they go through the growth stages, trying to adapt and evolve to the next stage.
Yeah, scaling is basically the bête noire
Right.
of any small company in there, because there are things that you can do once, twice, three times. But if, you know, your eventual aim for your company is to become, more than small, become larger, they're going to have to do this at scale, and everything has to scale with that, not just the tasks that you're doing, but also your procedures in there. You can end up rather you have to stop relying upon the fact that you will know everything that happens in the company and
Yeah.
control everything that happens in the company, because as it grows, that will slip through your fingers. So you have to almost proactively, preemptively get ready for that scaling there. And I feel that's the second problem that kills off small companies. The fact that it's not the scaling, it's that they're not ready or willing to scale, and they want the business to keep running the way it always has, despite the fact that you're no longer 10 people, you're now 20, 40, 80, whatever, and your throughput of work has doubled or tripled.
Yeah. So this is potentially the mindset of the senior leadership team or the owners or some of the people involved. It makes it difficult to move through those processes, and I suppose a lack of the infrastructure to enable you to grow.
That as well, the lack of the infrastructure. But you're quite right. I mean, I can understand how early staff members and founders, they're precious with their business, and I don't mean that in an insulting way. It means a lot to them, but you know, there comes a time when they have to release it, embrace it less tightly, and be willing to delegate more, and that can sometimes be difficult.
Yeah, yeah. Step back a little bit, hand over the reins. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
And I suppose, especially in the life science sector that you operate in, we do a bit in, is you'll get people that join a business because of the size of it, won't you? And what they're doing. And as it scales, they'll want to get off the bus and find the next little startup or scale up, if you like.
I understand it completely. I mean, you should go to the environment that you love, where you
Mm.
are loved in there, and you will find sometimes as companies expand, people say, "Well, it's not the business that it was," and
Yeah,
that's a
yeah,
valid observation. And there's nothing wrong with you saying, "I want to go and," maybe you want to go and work with the bleeding edge startup again, or go the opposite direction and say, "You know what, I'm looking for something more stable at this point."
And does that make management and leadership in the smaller organisations so much more difficult because of the things that we've just mentioned? And you've got people looking to lead the infrastructure, but management holding, or say owners holding onto the reins, those sorts of things.
It can be. It can
Yeah,
be. I think any of those small businesses, particularly as they're often done by, people they're relatively new to the startup or to the founding and so
yeah,
forth, you're going to find at least some of these problems in any of those smaller enterprises there. And I think I think that's one of the great values of founder programs and startup programs is that they can, equip people for this actual,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
understand that this is their path forward ahead of them, and some good mentorship. But yeah, there is those difficulties will almost always be there to some extent.
Okay. Okay. Cheers, Paul. Thank you. While we're talking about these varying sizes of organizations, I wanted to ask you, and it's probably more relevant in probably the larger organizations that you've mentioned, how important, because this is something that I think people forget, how important is managing up as a leader rather than, not just managing your team, but making yourself visible or managing upwards?
Wow. It is important. I think it varies depending upon your boss, of course, but there is a definite skill in that. Um, let me for a start say, if you have a boss that's somehow deficit or not doing their job or just a bad boss and so forth, no amount of managing up is going to fix it. In that
Uh,
case, you
uh,
you might imagine that you can do that, but you can't. But you should absolutely. Actually, I think here is a good rule of thumb is that
yeah,
you should be as little trouble to your boss as possible. That is, they have no concerns about you and they're aware to the level of their happiness that you are doing what you're doing and that they know what you're doing. And that may require you being proactive with them, pulling them into discussions or just keeping them in the loop or things
yeah,
like that. If you've got situations brewing, getting out in front of them and saying, look, there's something that's happening here. Maybe you'd like to give me some advice, but if not, at least I want you to be aware of it. So you do have to do that even in the best of circumstances.
yeah. I like that. Getting some people probably try and hide it, wouldn't they? Or, if you're not confident as a leader, you try and hide it, but getting out in front of it, like you said, then sounds like a good option.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can understand how people end up in that situation. They just give me a little bit more time and maybe this will go away or I'll fix it or something like that. But
Yeah,
I think you have to own up to things, particularly early on in your tenure, where you might not know everything or the problem that you see might not be a problem or might be something new, but you have to get out in front of it.
okay, brilliant, brilliant. Thanks, Paul. I was going to ask you. You've obviously managed multiple teams or multiple skill sets of teams at once. So you've got your bioinformaticians, your data scientists, etc. Obviously doing different things, but within your management structure, is it difficult to get teams with different skill sets and different agendas gelling together or working together? How do you achieve that?
It can be. It can be. I think whenever you end up with these cross-functional teams, whether by design or accidentally, you almost always end up with some people who are at the top of the pile and some people who are at the bottom of the pile. Those people who feel that they are in the important ones in the project, that they're the ones that are critical
Yeah,
skill, where the thing's driving, and and those who are not appreciated, things like that. And I think that can be very corrosive to team structure in there and to team morale. The people at the bottom start to check out, do
yeah,
as little as possible. Those people at the top start to get angry at not being appreciated enough, things like that. So as far as is possible, to put everyone on the same level in
yeah,
there, that and to have them be colleagues, if you will. Now, that can require a lot of juggling of difficult personalities in there, and sometimes a little bit of furtive, making sure that someone knows that they're appreciated, even
yeah,
if other members in the team don't there. But you have to be very careful, and you know people are different between different disciplines as well too. It's curious how different disciplines build up very different cultures in terms of the way they discuss things, the way they make decisions, things like that. But, at a bare minimum, they need to respect their teammates. And if that's broken, then you're breaking your team.
Yeah. So it's ensure that respect's there as a baseline, and then go from there. It's that's really interesting, because it can be difficult. It's not often you get managers who manage multiple teams. Normally it's like just software engineering team or whatever, but to come across like that, it's very difficult. The what on that topic, I was going to ask you, because I asked you about this last time we spoke, and it was, do you feel there's different cultures between the business and technology? Quite often in organizations, business and technology, they should be working in harmony but they can be very fractured. What's your experience around that?
Look, absolutely. And I thought that I had a grip on it, or was accepting of those differences. But just last year, I did some business education, and I could feel myself getting really frustrated with the mode of teaching, the thinking, everything like that, because me as a mathy, technical sort of guy just kept thinking, but why? How can you say that? What's the justification? Where's the evidence for this? So yeah, I think it's the big divide that can cause maybe the largest problems in small companies in there. The business and the technical in there, or, that, if you want to call it, sales or projects, and, those people are actually doing analytics or building software and things like that, because they've been educated in different sets of skills, and they have different incentives, and they have different ideas as to what constitutes good thinking in there. I've had a decent amount of success with technical people, sort of taking them aside, having a chat with them, saying, "This is, look, I know you don't quite understand why we're doing this, and this might not seem like good science to you, but it is important for the business for these reasons." So, slightly reframing their task, if you will, and also at the same time recognizing their fears and recognizing their anxiety about this gap there. Says, as far as the business people go, the business side rather, sometimes you got to give them a little bit of an education on how technology works, and how systems work, so they understand that it's not magic in there. Sometimes it looks terribly magic, and as practitioners behave like it's magic, but it is work that takes time and has its own set of rituals and decisions and things in there. So helping those two sides understand each other better.
I like that. It's what keeps coming through is the communication, isn't it? The communication and the information.
Yeah. Communication is, I frequently say to people that sort of technology is easy, people is difficult in there. And that if anything wrecks your company or a project, it's probably going to be a people problem in there. And unfortunately, particularly in the technical areas, we don't value educating people and communicating well. Even to the point of, how can you communicate a set of results to a group of stakeholders? How can you communicate that to higher ups, things like that, busy people who just want to know the essentials in there. And, you get someone who is good at talking to clients, customers, internal stakeholders, you hold on to them.
Yeah. It's definitely a talent, isn't it? It's definitely a talent. I know I've been peppering you with questions for a while now, so I won't keep you much longer. But it's one thing I wanted to ask: what mistakes have you? This is probably the larger companies again. What mistakes have you seen from organisations trying to scale teams quickly, possibly in the pharma sector, because we know those are large organizations we're both familiar with. And how can you prevent them or get around that, stop that
Okay.
happening?
Yeah. So, scaling teams, well, let's see, your simplest problem in there is hiring. And hiring is never easy.
Yeah,
And I could speak forever on hiring, but my opinion is if you're looking at a candidate and you're not 110% sure that they're the person you want, you should not go with them. Because someone who is ill fitted to a position is not going to help you. They're going to hold you back, at least initially. The time they take to get up to speed, them making mistakes, this effort you spend integrating them in there, so forth. And further along those hiring problems, I mean, very often people just look at this laundry list of qualifications, or they'll hire rock stars, things like that. A team of superstars is not a superstar team.
yeah,
There's the Google study where they discovered their B
right.
grade, their B class teams outperformed their A class teams because they were better at getting on with other people.
Yeah,
And so, I would look for those people who are good at working with others and who are adaptive. If you go too hard in on the technical qualifications, then the next problem, the next hurdle you'll come up against, this person will be unable to cope with it in there. So growing those teams, I guess if I was looking for a golden thread on that, I would be say building teams that are adaptable and scalable rather than let's just have a bigger team in there. And also accepting the fact that you're going to have extra levels of organization in there.
yeah,
There was that big thing, was it last year or the year before, where Bayer fired all its middle managers in
yeah.
there. And
Yeah,
this seemed middle managers come in for a lot of flack and a lot of criticisms, but middle managers are there for a reason, to help coordinate things. And I have extraordinary difficulty in believing that you can just say, let's not have anyone manage in here. People will manage themselves. You need your connectors. You need people to run around, and that connecting, that integration, that everything like that. It's always important, but it gets more important the bigger you get.
yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, you see that quite a bit, but don't you? When there's a downturn in the market or there's a pinch, people go into like, oh, we'll strip out our middle management layer. You know,
Yeah. And it feels to me, it's like, it's like an octopus where you've cut off its limbs in there. Do you really expect that it's going to know what's happening in all parts of the organization in there? I mean, some organizations are very middle management heavy,
yeah,
but I feel that's not an operational problem. That's almost a cultural problem. Why did you hire these people? Do they not have clear objectives and clear missions as to what they're doing, rather than middle management being useless per se?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Would you? So, listening to what you were saying now, when it comes to the hiring process, would you say you really look to, okay, they've got to have a base set of skills to be able to do a job, but to you, behaviors, values, sort of cultural that kind of thing is important just as much, if not more, when you're bringing a team together?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you do have to assure that they've got the technical skills.
Yeah,
And one of the regrettable things these days is people will bluff their way through or things like that. So it's always necessary to establish that they've got those in there. But beyond that, I'd rather have a conversation with a candidate, so as that, like, find out what sort of person they are, how they communicate, what they think about projects and things like that. So, you know, I'll take someone who's had a bunch of failures but has thought about them and has learnt things from it, rather than someone who is technically very adept and has just cranked out one project after another.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. You're getting more from the first individual, aren't you? Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. I know one of the things you've talked about in the past quite passionately is sort of developing other people, developing other leaders, developing other. How do you, in your teams, how do you bring the future leaders through? How do you help to develop your team members or
Wow.
colleagues?
Okay. So there's a question. So yeah. So it seems almost obvious to me that you should develop your people. Otherwise, you're not getting, well, quite blandly, a good return on your investment. When
Yeah,
you hire someone, in a sense, you're hiring for the person that they will become or can become in there. So,
yeah,
we need to develop our staff in there. I've had quite a good lot of luck with coaching or mentoring team members.
right.
And I think that can be very good because it's out of the view of other team members in there. And, you know, you let them sort of talk through the things that they're facing and you gently nudge them in a couple of directions. And it is sometimes astonishing how a highly skilled statistician has absolutely no idea on how to run a team or, even a small team or a project, or, it fills them with fear
Yeah,
in there. And, you know, you can also find that your team members have a lot of these hidden skills in there as well too. I had quite a good junior data scientist working for me who had been a computer programmer for many years beforehand. So there were all these solid software skills that were sitting in there that weren't being used in a current job in there. So, and I should say, one of the things I do like to hire or to have in my team is people who have had a number of jobs, a number of careers, or have changed direction in some way. That I think that gives them the ability to stand back and look at a problem from a distance. They don't have quite all the assumptions that someone who is devoted to the area has. They're able to sometimes ask the obvious dumb questions. And because they've changed before, they're capable of changing again. They're more adaptable.
yeah. So they bring in more. I think they probably bring in more diverse thought process. Would you say mindset, level of experience?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I've worked with great data scientists biomedical data scientists who had previously been, an astrophysicist, an aeronautical engineer, things like that, in entirely different fields, but they will come in with a different set of assumptions in there. And that can be very helpful to solving some of these tricky problems.
Perfect. Perfect. Thanks, Paul. Just before we wrap up, I'll ask you an AI question because in the current environment, it seems rude not to. But how do you think the I suppose the advances or the introduction of AI now is going to evolve a, a leader's skills? What sort of impact would it have on you as a leader in the future?
Hmm. Okay. Well, of course, everyone is asking those questions about AI at the
Mm.
moment. And my feel is that AI is not going to help us do AI in its current form, I should say, is not going to help us do different things, but it's going to help us do the same things faster and more effectively. So, being able to use AI to analyze documents, okay, summarize them or generate that documentation in there, get a command of an area to quickly analyze data, okay, to get this more push button analytics command over what's happening in front of you. So leaders are going to have to become at least a little bit more technical in
Yeah.
there. And, those leaders who, use their computers only to write Microsoft Word or
Mm.
sort of their email or something like that are going to be left behind.
Yeah.
It's we are going to be able to and be expected to be in command of much larger volumes of information in future, because that's what this large model world has enabled for us.
Yeah, that's interesting. The volume of data thing, I know you touched on it last time we spoke. I think that is a really interesting point. I've
Yeah.
actually randomly on LinkedIn seen a few people now pushing out hints and tips for AI, hints and tips for leaders, people who probably obviously not familiar with, with using certain products to help them as a leader. So it's interesting. You've
It's
got to
happening.
evolve. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And lastly, Paul, let's finish on a high. What's your greatest achievement as a leader? What's your greatest achievement as a leader? The thing you're most proud of?
This might seem a bit ridiculous, but it was when my team started having meetings without me, not deliberately, I should say. Or let's exclude Paul here. But I mean, we would have our regular touch points and things like that, and then they started in their particular sub projects and things like that. Started scheduling meetings amongst themselves because they recognized I didn't need to be there. They needed to talk to each other. They took that initiative, and I thought, this is it. Success as a leader is when your team doesn't need you.
Absolutely. That's the panacea, isn't it? I suppose you getting your team to be comfortable enough. Credit to you as a leader, and for them to be comfortable enough to hold meetings without your input required.
Yeah, so I've been consistent enough that they're sure of what they have to do, and they know they can be proactive and take that on, and that's just a great victory there.
Absolutely. Good spot to finish on, Paul. Thank you very much for your time today. It was brilliant to speak to you. Some great content there. We've rattled through 50 minutes without even thinking. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Adrian.
No problem. Cheers, Paul.